Welcome to the session. My name's Lucia and I'm here with Paul, who's here to talk to us about mobility. So welcome, Paul. Can you tell us what is the Fujitsu position in service-based business in mobility and the challenges for Fujitsu by COVID?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because there's a popular misconception that mobility is all about the auto industry and about the evolution from car ownership. And it's much more than that. It's a very interesting time for all of us where we look at our relationship with a traditional car, we look at the type of environments that we're going to be working and living in, and we look at the type of services and the type of value we want to get back from our mobility. And also opens up lots of new opportunities in terms of new services and things we haven't even dreamed about. If you think about when the smartphone revolution came along, we were just happy with the fact we could get email on a phone. But as we look forward, it became a much more breeding ground for new business models and new services that we all now consume and take for granted. Well, the same is going to happen with the world of mobility. And the interesting thing is what's driven that? And what's driven it has been a lot of things in the marketplace. And it's connectivity, the emergence of large mega cities in the future. So a lot of people have been tracking and looking at this and thinking, yes, this is going to change, and doing things about it. And a lot of the auto industry have been trying to embrace this. And then along came COVID. And of course, it's caused a pause and a thought to say, is this the right trajectory? Should we be doing the same things? And of course, budgets are hard, especially in the industries like automotive, where they've had to close factories and they've had to think about what their priorities are and reassess their very business. But if you think about it, it still is important for all of us to have a different relationship with the car and the ability for us to move forward. I think about it as an analogy of what COVID's done to mobility is a bit like a river. There's been a storm surge and it's raised the height of the river and the intensity of the river. Directionally, it's still going in the same way. And we look at it and we classify it as 3 C's. Consciousness, connectivity, and convergence. Consciousness is really about us as consumers and what we look to get from mobility. So if you think about the COVID experience, then we may have had 2 cars at home, we may be a 2-car family, we both commute to work and we take the children to school. And now all of a sudden, we're both working from home, or one of us might have been furloughed. And then we're thinking, why are we still paying for 2 cars? Why do we need 2 cars? Why do we need any cars? And then so therefore the consumer's now starting to think about the relationship they want to have with vehicles. And also, they're more aware of the impact on the planet. They're thinking more about what is it that actually we want to be responsible for. And so that's the consciousness side of it, which means the consumers now have a much more of a driving factor on the change, where before it was being driven by business. And then we see the connectivity. There's no slow up in the 5G rollouts. There's a big push towards the connectivity. That enables so much. That means that mobility world will be able to really consume those services on the go. And the ability for us to see Netflix or do some retail experience while we're traveling to work or just commuting for leisure. And then that drives that convergence. We're going to see all these disrupted markets coming together and really starting to think differently about what they do with that market. So the retail companies will want to be part of mobility. The financial services companies are going to find new ways, because if I don't own a car and I don't need to insure a car, what's the role for financial services? So all these disrupted industries, all these new startups, all of these new organizations coming into the ecosystem, they're all going to want to play into that new world. So has COVID had an impact? Yes, it's made people stop and think. Has it had an impact? Yes, it's made the consumer have more of a say in terms of direction, and it's made us accelerate a lot of things which are really about intelligent mobility. Working from home is a form of intelligent mobility. So the direction's the same, the speed and intensity will go up, and it's going to be very interesting times.
Sounds like exciting times. Can you tell us a bit about what the new ecosystems of work are and how they will be implemented?
Yeah, it's again, touching on what I said earlier on, the ecosystems at play will be changing quite significantly, and it's all going to be about services and data. Data will enable the services will create the value. The commodities will and the technology will just be enablement. So we get all excited about autonomous cars, connected cars. Yeah, they're exciting technology, but ultimately they'll just become a commodity in a services world. And so really it's about understanding that and thinking about the timing of that. So it's really going to be an S-curve of change. We think around about 2025 there'll be a tipping point of change, and that tipping point will see us accelerate through to the mobility world. So let's imagine 2025, we think maybe $500 billion business will be mobility. By 2030, probably $2 trillion. That'll still only be a third of the marketplace. So there's a huge amount of change going to happen in a small amount of time. And it's very, very similar to what happened in the smartphone revolution. That was about 5 years. And the start of that revolution, the runners and riders of the big companies that were disrupting didn't end up being the winners at the back end of it. So companies have to be very careful as they go through that change, and they have to think about what that change means for them and make sure they're ready. So the way to do that, we think, is to look at it in terms of the context of the now, near and the far. Right. What do I need to be doing now to be ready for this change? What do I need to be doing in the near to make sure that we can transform and be ready for the new ecosystem? What do I need to be doing in the far? How do I become part of the ecosystem? And so that's a really important thing, because you walk forward to the future and you think about what does that future look like, then you walk back to today's reality, and it's about what's the customer experience model that I'm going to solve in that future model? What's the new business model that allows me to do that? And then what's the technology that supports and enables that new business? And it's fundamental to think like that and to put it in the context of that now, near, far to ensure that you're thinking correctly. And then it's really about, when we talk about the technology stack, it's not just the technology stack of the future, it's the technology stack that transforms you and the way you think about it. And if you think about what we talked about there, it's services, it's data. So the things that become really interesting are how do you manage data? And certainly from a security point of view, how do you securely manage that data? How do we make sure that our consumers' data is looked after and that they can trust us with their data? And trust is a big thing in this. But also, how can that data be turned into value? How can we create value from that data? And so within Fujitsu, we have some interesting tools in our mobility suite, which are really to try and address that those particular areas. So digital twinning, for instance, is a way of us looking at today's business challenges around the automotive industry, for instance, in terms of how vehicles are manufactured and make that more efficient, but also looking at future business models and how you can really create those in a simulated way through digital twinning. And the other thing is the security side of it. If you think about the vehicle being a new technology hub, putting a security center around that and a security wrap around that becomes really, really important to make sure that we can deliver that value in a safe and predictable way.
Thanks, Paul. Now, you mentioned 2035 being a key tipping point. Can you give us some examples of what the future will look like?
Yeah, sure. That is a question I often get asked, and a very interesting thing for us to explore. And so we've thought about a few ideas around how we might make this happen. 2028. So let's take that S-curve of change between 2025 and 2030. Let's go in the middle at 2028. And we're kind of thinking, well, we can imagine in the future that say, Greta Thunberg, an environmental campaigner, has moved on to a world where she's in business and she's now selling printable rainwear. So her yellow Mac that she's very famous for, instead of you get it sent to your home, you get a digital image sent to you and you print it at home on your 3D printer. And it sounds kind of crazy to think you'd be printing clothes at home, but it's kind of really doable. And so you start thinking about that. Well, that's a form of intelligent mobility, because now I no longer need to ship. You don't have to go and buy the goods from the store, and the store doesn't have to ship the goods to you. They just send you a digital image. Now I've got rid of all of that transportation needs into what is intelligent mobility. And another couple of fun ideas we're thinking about is, would we see the underground transportation, say in London, getting rid of some of the tube trains and turning them into mobility superhighways where we could use scooters and bikes and other forms of mobility transportation underground in a safe way, because actually consumers don't want to get on trains anymore. They'd rather just have that experience. And then another one, which was kind of an interesting one, was the idea of vertical farming, which again is something that's very real today. You can imagine in the future that maybe in Manhattan, New York, you would have maybe 20 vertical farms on the island of Manhattan, which would actually give all of the food needs to that island. So instead of having to keep shipping goods in and out to New York, suddenly it's self-sufficient, which seems crazy to think about, but very doable. But to think about that as being farms of the future.
So, Paul, what has Fujitsu done to create their own state of readiness for Mobility DX?
we've had a real rethink about how we go to market in this topic, and we've created a global team, a global mobility team, which I'm fortunate enough to be leading that consultancy-led approach. And we've also created ourselves offerings that sit under our Fujitsu Mobility Accelerator suite. And they're really technology that are going to enable change and help companies transform, as well as being using Fujitsu as its consultative partner to really spell out what that change looks like.
Great. Can you tell us finally, what are Fujitsu's aspirations for Mobility DX?
Yeah, real simple actually. We want to do two things. We want to help our customers digitally transform into that new ecosystem, and we want to make sure that we digitally transform into that new ecosystem. We're in this journey together, and we want to make sure that both ourselves and our customers and our partners all end up in the right place by the time we've gone through this S-curve of change.
Yeah, really exciting ideas there. Thank you so much to Paul. It sounds like it really is exciting times ahead for all of us with the emergence of mobility. Companies need to act now to create a state of readiness. Thanks very much for watching.